Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect. Ashley and I had the opportunity to record a podcast with Arlene Vassal and Casey Keene of the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, talking about all things Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month 2021. This podcast is a continuation of that conversation, but if you haven't yet, we super recommend that you listen to part one first, that explores the theme of DVAM 2021: no survivor justice without racial justice. Enjoy. We've been talking a lot about how influential Domestic Violence Awareness Month is, how critical prevention is in Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and also it's 1/12 of the year. We have a lot more time outside of October to be advancing domestic violence, advancing racial justice, advancing survivor justice too. How are you hoping actions about domestic violence prevention shift or advance as a result of this Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month in 2021, and while centering the voices and leadership of survivors, advocates, and communities of color?
So I think the first thing for me is to shift the narrative of how we talk about prevention, of what we talk about when we talk about prevention. Because I think we can all agree that what we want to do is create safe and thriving communities, right? And what does that look like? What does addressing root causes look like? What does addressing the disparities that the pandemics that we are currently living through, what they've revealed, right? So, like Casey said, we can't unlearn that. So we have to be intentional about how we pivot our prevention work to respond to what we know to be true, what we've always known to be true, but had gaps in how we responded, had gaps regarding who's at the table, regarding um, who has power at those tables. What does power look like? How do we shift power to the individuals and the communities most impacted? So what does that look like? So I know someone on the Domestic Violence Awareness Project advisory group mentioned, and I wish I knew exactly who said it because I want to give, credit to the person. But again, I will say as someone from that group, we need to be the work and not just do the work. So I think that really connects to the shift that needs to happen in our prevention world. And we need to break down silos between intervention and prevention within DV organizations. Prevention should be a part of everybody's role, regardless of a title or not, right? Because we're all wanting to create safe and thriving communities. We need to be intentional again about engaging survivors, advocates, and communities of color in our intervention and prevention efforts from development. Let me repeat, from conception, actually, from conception to development to implementation. And what does that look like? What is the pivot that needs to happen? And again, how are we talking about prevention on a continuum, right? And how are we using language that's inviting to communities that we want to collaborate with, communities that we want at our tables? And also, how are we going to other tables? Like, it doesn't always have to be our table. How can we create resources for other individuals within communities to create their own tables and choose whether or not they want to invite us to the table? Does it really matter as long as they are working to prevent violence in their community? Does it really matter who's at the table and whose table it is? How can we create resources so that communities can get the work done within their community?
Yes, Arlene. And breaking down the silos, I know it's something we've been talking about for a long time and something that we really are invested in doing. And now more than ever, we can see the opportunity to really connect the prevention and intervention pieces and really connect it to the racial justice work. And I'm reminded again of last year's National Prevention Town Hall when Lisa Winchell Caldwell from the Michigan Coalition said, "At what point in my history of survivorship did I become irrelevant to the process of prevention?" And so I think that there's an opportunity here to really explore what we mean by survivor centered prevention. What would it look like to do prevention work that was survivor centered, and how could that break down the silos and really shift the focus back to, the needs and priorities of survivors who are most marginalized. So yeah, just really excited about the opportunity to break down the silos with this kinds of messaging, and bring us all together collectively as a movement that's working toward this common goal and this common vision for our future.
And I think this might be a good place to bring in the fact that the Domestic Violence Advisory Group is working in conjunction with NRCDV to produce a video that centers the voices of survivors of color and brings to life the theme of no survivor justice without racial justice. And that whole series will be titled My Story Matters. So again, the video will humanize and put a face to the message and everything that we're talking about here. So just wanted to put a plug in for that, because again, we can talk about the concepts as national organizations, but to hear the voices of the individuals most impacted, and with a theme of My Story Matters, like Casey said, Lisa had mentioned, when did her story become irrelevant to prevention? So I think we are hearing more and more and more that survivors, their story matters and their stories are directly connected to prevention.
That is so I'm sitting here with like chills and like my jaw on the floor. That is so incredibly powerful. My story matters. I cannot wait for that video to come out. I think that, making sure that prevention work truly is survivor centered is so critical to Arlene, what you had said, creating those safe, thriving communities where everybody has that opportunity to thrive. That is the goal. And these resources that you're providing and these conversations are helping people get there. I also, Arlene, last time we were on a podcast together, we were joking about one of the quotes of the podcast being a painting in a home office space. And here we are again. You said be the work, not just do the work. And like, I'm ready to break out the acrylic paint set and put that on my wall now. It's such a great simple reminder
Yeah.
of this work that we do. It's so unique in that it does bring our whole selves into it, and that how are we doing the homework on our whole selves so that we can show up and be the work and be the change that we need to see for healthy, thriving, safe communities. There was also something that I heard you both discuss in that last question about breaking down the silos, and we can't unlearn what we've been through in the last 18 plus months. And I heard you mention it earlier too about centering frontline workers. And so I know there's another piece to your theme about celebrating and appreciating advocates as essential frontline workers. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you chose this message and call for action, and how others can join in celebrating and appreciating advocates as essential frontline workers?
So advocates have been working tirelessly to promote safety and justice for survivors, and especially in the context of a pandemic, or twin pandemics, right? They are overextended, they're exhausted, and they're undervalued at the same time in this really critical role. And advocates of color carry a disproportionate burden when it comes to essential frontline work in communities most impacted. So that's why we really feel we need to appreciate, honor, and look to the leadership of advocates on the ground who are doing this essential work every day. So we really are doing everything we can and seeing it as our responsibility to do everything we can to support and promote the wellness of advocates doing this work in community.
Something that again was said in the DVAP advisory group is like how like imagine if we can build a movement that supports the well-being, wellness, resilience of advocates, particularly Black and Brown advocates. What would that movement, look and feel like, right? So I feel like we had to, and it's the perfect opportunity to respond, right? To and lift up the strength, the passion that advocates have displayed beyond these last 2 years, but especially during this time in their programs, in their communities, and in their homes, right? And this has all happened simultaneously. They're doing all of this at the same time. So I think we need to use this opportunity to do that.
Well, thank you, Arlene and Casey, for your comments on that. I've been really enjoying listening to this conversation as Tori stepped in and was asking you some questions. And also just wanted to say that I love the idea of like, don't just do the work, but be the work. I think it's such a, personally a great reminder for me to always be thinking like, who do I need to be? To be able to show up in the ways that I say are important to me, right? Like, how do I put that into action? So thank you for that. And, you all started talking about some of the things that people are really have been feeling with these two pandemics, the burnout, the exhaustion, but also the resilience and the dedication, I think. And this is now the second Domestic Violence Awareness Month to happen during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm wondering how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the needs and priorities of preventing domestic violence.
So I think it's such an important reflection, to have about sort of how our work has been impacted by this pandemic, and how it's impacted our prevention work. I think it's important to acknowledge that we've really been surviving ongoing collective trauma for some time now. And the pandemic comes with all kinds of experiences of grief and loss and fear and pain. And it is helping people, I think, understand trauma in a whole new way. For those people who have not had an experience of trauma, it may feel new, but for many, this experience just really builds upon our trauma histories. And so we are learning to process, to cope with, and to respond to this collective experience and the many challenges it continues to present. And I think that's why at NRCDV, we really feel it's important to extend grace and empathy, not only to ourselves, but also to others, to be more in tune to our needs, to really lean on our community, and to prioritize our wellness. I mean, just as Arlene said, we have to, right? We have to do that. We're in a position right now where that needs to become the priority. And that's what it takes to promote resilience. And that's what the work of prevention is. Prevention is exactly the work that's needed right now, because prevention is about fostering communities where people can thrive. So that's the work that we do. And if we think expansively about our prevention work and move toward those outer layers of the social ecology, then naturally we're doing work on health equity, we're doing work on economic justice, we're embracing grassroots models of community care and community organizing. I think we're realizing that we need to meet people where they are. We need to pivot our existing prevention programs and curricula in order to respond to the immediate needs for people's well-being. So I think that's what allows us to sort of recenter and refocus our prevention work because of this experience.
And I think like we need to break down break down the silos. That is so critical, because what we continue to hear is that like the role of prevention throughout these pandemics for some organizations have become invisible, right? Because people have gone into crisis mode, crisis intervention, response mode, heightened response mode. So therefore, the belief is that we don't have a place for prevention, when that is total opposite. This is the time that we need to invest in prevention. This is a time we need to address the disparities that have been laid bare, that have become visible. For some, it's always been there for some, but for many of us, right? For many of them, it's always been clear to me. This is the time, and like there's been concrete gaps that has been identified in our prevention efforts, including the lack of engagement with communities and advocates and survivors, in particular communities and in communities that are most impacted by the violence, right? That we collectively would like to prevent. So that's been one thing that, Casey had talked about. We can't unlearn what we've learned. And that is one gap that has been two gaps that's been crystal clear. One, the value of prevention in these times, during these pandemics. And two, the lack of meaningful engagement, rather, with the communities and the individuals who are most impacted by what we're trying to prevent. And lastly, I would say the long-term exhaustion that Casey so eloquently talked about. And in our work, being able to say in our organizations with our collaborative partners, um, it's okay to rest. Resting is a gift. It's okay to rest.
Thank you for that, Arlene. I feel like that crisis mode just kind of gets it gets really hard to carry after an extended period of time. And I think that's also a way that like white supremacy culture shows up, is that there's no time to rest, there's no time to take care of yourself. And I really appreciate you bringing that reminder to our audience. I also, I think that a lot of what you had shared about, the identifying those gaps in prevention and the value of prevention during an ongoing crisis will be so validating for the listeners of this podcast. And I know that we're almost at time on this podcast. I know Ashley and I could probably talk to you all day. We just wanted to close with a final question to, send folks on their way of, who else they can and what else they can learn from, to really solidify these messages into their daily actions. So are there inspiring individuals, organizations, or resources for learning more about the connections between survivor justice, racial justice, and prevention that you want to share with our listeners before we close today?
So I would say, I think a really great place to start would be joining us for our many opportunities throughout Domestic Violence Awareness Month that have been organized and put together by the Domestic Violence Advisory Group. Because this month we're committed, and in the future, we're committed to centering the voices and leadership of Black women, survivors, and advocates. And so we have a variety of voices that we can all learn from throughout the month. And so we encourage you to join us for our National Call for Unity, which is on Friday, October 1st. We encourage you to join us for our Círculos conversations with women of color advocates. This will be a 2-part conversation series where everyone will have the opportunity to listen, learn from, and honor the lived experiences of women and color advocates who really will discuss what it would look like to build a movement that truly supports Black and Brown women's well-being and ability to bring their whole selves to this work, as Arlene emphasized. We also encourage you to check out our My Story Matters video for more voices. And we are really excited because we have recently released some resources for dismantling anti-Blackness and promoting racial justice in our work to build safe and healthy communities. These resources center on health equity and really uplift the work of Black advocates who have been working to promote health equity, and the voices of survivors who have had experiences at the intersections of health inequity and gender-based violence. And one of them is the Back to Basics paper that NRCDV co-authored with NSVRC. The subtitle is Partnering with Survivors and Communities to Promote Health Equity. And we have a related TA question of the month by our amazing colleague, Patty Branco, who wrote in response to the question, how can domestic and sexual violence advocates center health equity for Black women in our work? And in both of those resources, there is a wealth of recommendations for leaders, Black leaders, survivors, organizations who are invested in this work, who we can learn from and follow. And I would also add that throughout the month of October, NRCDV will be highlighting individuals, organizations, and resources that center Black humanity, Black joy, and Black healing. So you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and YouTube, and even on Tumblr to, really dig into the wisdom and the expertise of those who we really want to center in our work. So Arlene, other recommendations?
I would say our domestic violence awareness project website, so dvawareness.org, our preventipv.org website. And then I would say, to kind of summarize much of what Casey just talked about, for listeners, if you're in organizations, in a leadership role or not, intentionally create space for Black and Brown survivors, advocates, activists, and preventionists to focus on wellness, to focus on self-care, to focus on well-being, center and support organizations led by Black individuals. And I would just say, listen to Black women and trust Black women.
Thank you so much for all of those resources, individuals, organizations, and Arlene, your last point of we can't list every single person, so this is how folks can, as they go about their day-to-day life, really think about how are they listening to and trusting Black women in their work and beyond too. So I'm really excited to share all those resources with our listeners. Every resource that you did name, we will include a link to that where this podcast will be published. So it'll be really easy for folks to find that. Arlene, Casey, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today, for bringing your wisdom to our audience, for the incredible work that you both do to support survivor justice, racial justice, and prevention. It's always an honor and an inspiration to get to share space with you two, and I'm super grateful for it. Ashley, did you have any final points to share?
Oh gosh, Tori, you said it so well. I mean, I echo your sentiments, and I learn so much from you both and the work that NRCDV does. And I think I'm excited. I mean, I was like jotting down all of the events and resources that y'all were sharing, and then I remembered that I think that Prevent Connect, we're gonna get to do some work around your Back to Basics paper with NSVRC. So I'm really looking forward to that. But it's just always such a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Arlene and Casey, and Tori, of course, you too. And I'm just really looking forward to where this conversation goes, how we continue to intentionally live in to these messages and really focus our prevention work on on survivors and, survivors at the margins and Black survivors in particular. So thank you all so, so much.
And I want to say thank you to both of you and to Valora US and Prevent Connect for actually walking the talk and for being like amazing collaborative partners, meaningful, demonstrating what meaningful collaboration really looks like, and lifting up our messages, and always just supporting our messaging and our theme during Domestic Violence Awareness Month and beyond. So thank you all for being amazing partners.
Yes, thank you. We're so grateful for your partnership and looking forward to continuing to do the work together.
Thanks for listening. Follow along with other Prevent Connect podcasts at preventconnect.org/podcast.